Piers Plowman by William Langland. Passus 14. "I have only one whole outfit," said Hawken. "I am the less to blame, though it is soiled and seldom clean. I sleep in it at night, and also I have a housewife, hired help, and children. I have taken a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Who will often spill on it and spoil it, and despite anything I do, it's been laundered in Lent and out of Lent as well, with the soap of sickness that searches very deep, and lathered with the loss of property, till I was loath at heart to aggrieve God or good man in any way I knew, and so was shriven by the priest, who for my sins assigned me patience as my penance, and to feed the poor men, and to take care of my Christendom, to keep it in cleanliness. And I could never, by Christ, keep it clean an hour, that I didn't soil it with sight, or with some idle speech, or by work, or by word, or by will of my heart, that I don't make it all messy from morning till evening. And I shall teach you," Conscience told him, "how contrition may be used to scrape your coat clean of all kinds of filth, contrition of heart, etc. Do well will wash it and wring it with a wise confessor, confession of mouth, etc. Do better will scrub it and score it till no scarlet could be brighter, and dye it with God's grace to amend yourself, and with good will, and then send you to satisfaction, to let the sun bleach it, satisfaction. Do best will keep it clean from unkind deeds, then no filth shall defile it, nor any moth devour it, nor either fiend or false man befoul it in your lifetime. No herald nor harper will have a fairer garment than Hawken the active man, if you act according to my teaching. Nor any minstrel be held more worthy among poor and rich than will Hawken the wayfarer, who is activa vita. And I'll provide you with dough," said Patience, "though no plough tills, and flour to feed folk with, as may be best for the soul, though grain never grew, nor grape upon vine, I'd allot livelihood to all that live and move, and that enough. None shall lack what's necessary to them. Have no care, etc. God feedeth the fowls of the air, etc. The patient overcome, etc. Then Hawken laughed a little and swore a light oath. "Whosoever believe you by our Lord, I don't believe he's blessed." "No," said Patience patiently, and pulled out of his bag victuals of great virtue for all kinds of beasts, and said, "Lo, here's livelihood enough, if what we believe is true. For none was ever lent life unless livelihood was arranged, whereof and wherefore and whereby to live. First the wild worm under wet earth, fish to live in the flood, and in the fire the cricket, the curlew whose kind is to live on air, his flesh the cleanest among birds, and beasts on grass and on grain and on green roots, meaning that all men might likewise live through loyal belief, as our Lord witnesses. Whatsoever ye shall ask from the Father in my name, etc. And elsewhere, Man doth not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God. But I listened and looked to see what livelihood it was that Patience so praised. And he pulled from his bag a piece of the paternoster, and proffered it to us all. And so it was fiat voluntas tua that would feed us all. Have some, Hawken, said Patience, and eat it when you're hungry, or when your teeth chatter for chill, or you chew your cheeks for thirst. Shall never handcuffs harm you, nor anger of great lords, prison or pain, for patientes vicunt. So long as you're restrained in speech, and in looking, and inhaling odors, and in handling things, in all your 5 senses, you need never care for corn, nor for clothes or drink, nor dread death nor devil, but die as God pleases, either through hunger or through heat. At his will be it. For if you live by his lore, the shorter life the better. If anyone loves Christ, he does not love this world. For by his breath beasts grew and walked abroad. He spoke, and they were made, etc. Therefore, by his breath both men and beasts live, as Holy Writ's words witness when men say their graces. Thou openest thy hand and fittest every living being with blessing. It is found that 40 winters folk lived without plowing, and out of the flint sprang the flood that folk and beasts drank. And in Elijah's era, heaven was closed, so that no rain rained. Thus men read in books that men lived for many winters without minding the plow. 7 slept, as the book says, 700 winters, and lived without livelihood, and at the last they awoke. And if men lived as moderation would, there should never more be shortages among Christian creatures, if Christ's words are true. But unkindness makes charistiam among Christian people, or plenty makes pride among poor and rich. But moderation is worth so much that it may not cost too dear. For the mischance and misery among men of Sodom came about through abundance of bread, and because of pure sloth. Idleness and abundance of bread nourished the basest sin. Since men were immoderate in their meat and drink, did deadly sin that the devil found pleasing. Vengeance fell on them for their vile sins. So they sank into hell, those cities, each one. Therefore, let us live with moderation, and let's make faith our defense. And through faith comes contrition, conscience knows well, which drives away deadly sin and reduces it to venial. And though a man might not speak, contrition might save him and bring his soul to bliss, so long as faith bears witness that while he lived he believed in the lore of Holy Church. Ergo, contrition, faith, and conscience naturally comprise do well. And there are surgeons for deadly sins when shrift of mouth is lacking, but shrift of mouth is worth more if a man is truly contrite. For shrift of mouth slays sin, be it never so deadly. Per confessionem to a priest, peccata occidentur. While contrition does nothing but drive it down into a venial sin, as David says in the Psalter, et quorum tecta sunt peccata. But satisfaction searches out the root, and both slays and purges, and if it had never been about, brings deadly sin to naught, so that it's never again seen or sore, but seems a wound healed. Now, where does charity dwell? Asked Hawken. I don't remember my life anyone that spoke with him as widely as I'd traveled. Where perfect truth and poor heart are, and patience of tongue, there charity chiefly lives. Chamberlain for God himself. Is patient poverty, Hawken asked, more pleasing to our Lord than riches earned righteously and reasonably spent? Yes, quis est ille? Patience exclaimed. Quick, laudabimus eum. Though men read about riches right to the world's end, I never knew any one who was rich that when he had to make his reckoning, when he drew to his death day, his dread was not great, and that at the reckoning he fell into arrears rather than out of debt. Where a poor man dares plead, and prove by pure reason to have a lenience of his Lord, he has a legal claim to it. From a righteous judge he asks for joy who has been joyless always, and says, Lo, birds and beasts that are barred from bliss, and wild worms in woods, the winters you grieve them and make them almost meek and mild for hunger, and afterward you send them summer, which is their sovereign joy, and bliss to all who have being, both wild and tame. Then may beggars like beasts look for better treatment who have lived all their lives languishing and hungry, unless God sent them sometime some kind of joy. Either here or elsewhere, kind would never wish it, for he was born to bitter fate, for whom no bliss was shaped. Angels who are now in hell once had joy, and dives lived in delight and dus vie. Just so reason judges that those gentlemen who were lords, and their ladies as well, lived their lives in mirth. But God has a curious custom, according to kind wit, of giving many men their remuneration before they've earned it. Just so God deals with some rich men, it seems to me a pity, since they have their hire here and heaven as it were, and great delight in living without labor of their bodies. And when they die, they are disallowed, as David says in the Psalter, they have slept and found nothing, and elsewhere, as the dream of them that awake, O Lord, in thy city, even to nothing wilt thou reduce, etc. Alas, that riches shall rob and ravish man's soul from the love of their Lord in their last hour. Hired hands that are paid ahead are evermore needy, and seldom does he die out of debt who dines before he deserves to, and until he's done his duty and his day's work. For when a workman has done his work, then one can see truly what his work was worth, and what he has deserved, and not to fetch pay in advance for fear of rejection. So I say about you rich, it doesn't seem you ought to have heaven in your home here and heaven hereafter. Just as a servant who gets his salary in advance and later insists on more, like one who had none and has higher at last. It may not be, you rich men, or Ch Lies of God. It is difficult to cross from delights to delights. And if you rich people have pity and keep the poor well fed, and live just as law enjoins, doing justice to them all, and reward with double wealth all whose hearts well with pity, and as a hired hand that had his hire before he began work, and when he has done his duty, well men do him other kindness, give him a coat beyond the contract, just so Christ gives heaven both to the prosperous and the not prosperous who show pity in their lives. And all who do their duty well have double pay for their labors. Here on earth forgiveness of their sins and heaven's bliss hereafter. But it is but seldom seen in holy saints' books that God rewarded double rest to any rich man. For there is much mirth among the rich, what with their meals and their clothing, and much mirth is in May among wild beasts, and so forth while summer lasts, their solace continues. But beggars about midsummer have breadless suppers, and yet winter is worse for them, for they walk westshod, faint from thirst and from hunger and foully abused, and berated by rich men that it's heart-rendering to hear. Now, Lord, send them some summer and some kind of joy, heaven after they go hence, who are here in much need. For thou, mightiest, have made all men so that none was more needy than another, and all alike witty and wise, if that had well pleased thee. And have mercy on these rich men that don't maintain thy prisoners. For the good thou hast given them, ingrati, are many. But God of thy goodness, give them grace to amend. For may no dearth do them harm, drought nor wet, nor either heat or hail, if they have their health. Of what they wish for and would have, they are wanting nothing here. But poor people, thy prisoners, Lord, in the pit of mercy. Comfort those creatures whom many cares afflict, dearth and drought, all their days here. Woe in winter times for want of clothing, and in summer times seldom sup till they're full. Comfort thy careworn Christ in thy kingdom, for how thou comfortedst all creatures, clerks bear witness. Ye will be turned to me, and ye will be saved. Thus, in genere, of this gentle, kind Jesus Christ said to pillagers and plunderers, to rich and to poor, to whores, to whoremongers, to all kinds of people. Thou taughtest them in the Trinity to take baptism, and through Christianing be clean of all kinds of sin. And if thou our folly it befell us to fall into sin afterward, confession and acknowledging and craving thy mercy should amend us as many times as any man would desire. And if the devil should debate against this and disturb us in our consciences, we should quickly take the acquaintance and accost the fiend with it. Let it be known, etc., through the passion of the Lord. And so repel our opponent, and prove ourselves under protection. But The parchment for these letters patent must be made of poverty, and of pure patience and perfect belief. When made of pomp and of pride, the parchment crumbles, and in practice for all people, unless they're poor of heart. Otherwise, all is in vain. All that we ever did, paternoster and penance and pilgrimage to Rome, unless our expenses and dispensing spring of a true well, otherwise is all our labor lost. Lo, how men write on windows they provide the friars with, if the foundation is false. Therefore Christians should be rich in common, none covetous for himself. For there are 7 sins that are always assailing us. The fiend follows them all that tries to foster them, but with riches those ribalds most readily beguile men. For where riches reign, acts of reverence follow, and that is pleasing to pride in poor and in rich. But the rich is given reverence by reason of his riches, where the poor is pushed back and perhaps has more of wit and of wisdom that are far away better than riches or royalty, and heard more readily in heaven. For the rich has much to reckon with, and walks right softly. The highway toward heaven is often blocked by riches. Thus it is impossible for a rich man, etc. While the poor presses ahead with a pack on his back, for their works follow them. Blatantly as beggars do, and boldly he craves for his poverty and patience a perpetual bliss. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. But pride reigns in riches rather than in poverty. Either in the master or in his man he maintains some lodging. But in poverty, where patience lives, pride has no might, and none of the 7 sins may sit there for long, or have power in poverty, if patience accompany it. For the poor is always prepared to please the rich, and is obedient to his bidding for the breadcrumbs he gives, and obedience and boastfulness must be evermore at war, and each hates the other in all sorts of acts. If wrath wrestles with the poor, he derives the less from it. For if they put in a complaint the law, the poor is the weaker. And if he chides or chafes, he achieves the less. For he looks lowly, and his language is pleasant, who must ask other men for his meals or money. And if gluttony grieves poverty, he gains the less by it. For his revenue will not reach far enough to buy rich foods, and though his gluttony be for good ale, he goes to cold bed, with his head exposed, inadequately covered, for when he stretches to his full extent the straw in his sheets. So for his gluttony and great sloth he has a grievous penance, which is a world of woe when he wakes and weeps for cold, and sometimes for his sins, so he never marry without mourning mixed in, and misery as well. And if covetousness catch the poor, they may not come together, and notably by the neck may either grasp the other. For it's common knowledge that covetousness has a keen will, and has hands and arms of great length, and poverty's just a puny thing, appears not up to his navel, and there was never satisfactory sport between the short and the long. And though avarice would anger the poor, he has but little power, for poverty has only packs to put his good in, while avarice has huge chests and iron-bound coffers. And which is easier to break open? Less uproar is made by a beggar's bag than an iron-bound coffer. Lechery loves him not, for he has little silver to spend, and sits not down to dine delicately, nor drinks wine often. A straw for the stews. They'd not be standing, I think, If their only patrons were poor men, there'd be no roofs upon their houses. And though sloth pursues poverty and serves not God's pleasure, misery is always an intermediary and makes him think that God is his greatest help, and after God no one, and he is his servant, as he says, and of the same household. And whether he serves him or serves him not, he bears the sign of poverty, and in that livery our Lord delivered all mankind. Therefore, any poor man who is patient may claim by pure right, after his ending here, heaven's kingdom's bliss. Much more confidently may he claim it that could have his will here, in land and in lordship and delights of the body, and leaves it all for God's love and lives like a beggar. And as a maid forsakes her mother for a man's love, her father and all her friends, and follows her mate, much is that maid to be loved by the man who weds her, more than a maiden who is married through brokerage, as by assent of sundry parties, and silver thrown in, more for the sake of money than the mutual love of the pair. So it proves with every person who forsakes possession and applies himself to be patient and weds poverty, who is sib to God himself, so close is poverty. "May God have my troth," said Hawken. "I hear you praise poverty much. What is poverty, Patience?" said he, "properly defined?" "Poverty," said Patience, "is a hateful good, a removal from cares, a possession without impropriety, a gift of God, mother of health, a narrow path without anxiety, nurse of wisdom, a business without loss, an uncertain fortune, felicity without care." "I can't construe this," Hawken told him. "You must translate it into English." "All this in English," said Patience, "is very hard to expound, but I shall explain some of it, so you may understand. Poverty is the principal point that pride hates most. Then it's good for a good reason, whatever grieves pride. Just as contrition is a comforting thing, conscience well knows, and sorrow in itself and a solace to the soul, so poverty is properly penance to the body and a joy to patient poor, pure spiritual health, and contrition is comfort and cura animatum. Therefore, poverty is a hateful good. Seldom does poverty sit to decide the truth, or is assigned the job of justice to make judgments on men, nor made mayor over men, or minister under kings. Seldom is any poor man compelled to punish any people. Therefore, poverty and poor men perform the commandment, "Do not judge anyone," a removal from cares. Seldom does a poor man become really rich save by rightful inheritance. He wins nothing with false weights, nor with unlicensed measures. He borrows nothing from his neighbors, but what he knows he can repay. A possession without impropriety. The fourth is a fortune from which the soul flourishes, with sobriety from all sin, and also still more. It diverts the flesh from manifold follies, a collateral comfort, Christ's own gift, a gift of God. The fifth is mother of might and of man's health, a physician for foul ills, a friend in all temptations, and for an unlearned man ever alike a lover wholly clean, mother of health. The sixth is a path of peace. Yes, through the pass of Alton, poverty might pass without peril from robbers. For where poverty passes, peace follows after, and ever the less his load is, the lighter he is of heart. Poverty will sing on his journey in the face of the thief. And a man hardy of heart among a heap of thieves. Therefore, Seneca says, poverty is a narrow path without anxiety. The seventh is a well of wisdom, with few words to speak, for lords make little allowance for him, nor listen to his opinion. He tempers his tongue toward the truth, who covets no treasure. Nurse of wisdom. The eighth is a lawful labor, and loath to take more than he may surely deserve, in summer or in winter. And though he negotiates, he regrets no loss if he can gain charity. A business without loss. The ninth is sweet to the soul, no sugar sweeter, for patience comprises bread for poverty himself, and sobriety is sweet drink and a good physician in sickness. Thus for our Lord's love St. Augustine, a lettered man, taught me. A blessed life without busy cares for body and for soul. Felicity without care. Now God, who gives all good, grant his soul rest, who first composed this to explain to men what poverty meant. Alas, said Hawken the active man then, that after my christening I hadn't died and been buried deep for do-well's sake. So hard it is, said Hawken, to live and do no sin. Sin pursues us always, said he, and began to grow sorrowful, and wept water with his eyes, and bewailed the time that ever he done deed that displeased dear God. Swooned and sobbed and sighed full often that he'd ever had land or lordship, less or more, or been master over any man more than of himself. I would not be worthy, God knows, said Hawken, to wear any clothes, neither shirt nor shoes, except for shame alone to cover my cadaver, said he, and cried fast for mercy, and wept and wailed, and therewith I awoke. End of Piers Plowman, Passus 14.